Hey, friends, welcome back to the podcast. I've been thinking a lot lately about how different our paths can be, even when we come from the same place. Today, we're talking about choice, change, and the small decisions that shape our lives. This episode is not about blaming our parents or rehashing pain, it's about what happens after the childhood you didn't choose. I've spent the last 2 years focusing on self care and healing through small groups at church, reading my Bible, praying, leaning on people who are positive, and also therapy. Therapy has been instrumental in my healing. And if you met me 2 years ago, I was a skeptic when it came to therapy. I did not think therapists were real. I felt like I had had therapists in the past, but nobody really got me. So, seeing the different outcomes in my family made me pause and reflect on choices. So let me set the scene for you. I come from a very large blended family with multiple divorces and remarriages, constant transition, instability, and emotional shifts. Every day in my house was pure chaos. There were 9 of us living in a 3 bedroom, small house. Think 1,100 square feet. And my parents had a bedroom. My older brother had his own bedroom. There were bunk beds in the living room for my younger siblings, and my sister and my stepsister and I all shared a bedroom together. And our living room furniture was wicker patio furniture. Like, think Walmart white wicker with the bright floral pads on it, and a coffee table, and then two little chairs. That was our living room furniture for 9 people. And we just didn't connect as a family. We blended very early on. Our parents really kind of forced us into it very early on in their relationship after their own divorces and before their divorces were even finalized. And so I just wanted to be as far away as possible. I wanted to run. I spent way more time out of the house than in the home. I mentioned in my previous episodes, I had really latched on to my older brother who was making good friends, and I had found a good friend group and was really settling in. And I just wanted away from the chaos because I was always getting in trouble because I didn't respect my stepdad, and I certainly didn't want to have anything to do with his kids. So that struggle was real. This is easy for me to talk about because I feel like I'm an expert in blended families. The thing that I learned early on from these experiences is that relationships always end, nothing is permanent, you're always in survival mode versus healing. And I noticed these patterns forming in my siblings even as kids. So we could have gone two different paths. Path one broke the cycle and they made a better life for themselves and didn't repeat all of the same patterns. I say all of the same patterns because who we were as children and who we were raised by as children does translate into our own lives going forward in little ways, right? There will always be little pieces of you that are still your mother's daughter or your father's daughter or whatever. So, my sister has her own incredible story of triumph and overcoming and perfection hangover, honestly. My sister is, I, I am her biggest fan. With all the trauma that I experienced, my sister experienced far more than I did. In fact, my partner met my sister for the first time and he told me, he said, Melissa, I thought that your story was just mind blowing, like crazy overcoming, and that you had this awesome story, and you do. But your sister's story is incredible. So, my sister, and I will bring her on the podcast to tell her story her way, but she went through a life of really poor decisions early on as a young adult, teenager, and young adult. And again, this is not pointing fingers, but she had to learn and grow through that. Eventually, she finally decided this life was not for her and she went to school. And then she went on to college at the same college where her dad had taught. He was a professor there. So she went on to go to this school, get her bachelor's degree because now as an adult, she ended up having children and she outgrew that kidney disease, but her oldest daughter has the same kidney disease. So I often tell her that God knew what he was doing when he made her my niece's mama because there's not another person on this planet that could advocate for her daughter's health like she can. So that's a little bit about my sister. Now, she had her kids She focused heavily on her children, especially her oldest, getting her healthy, keeping her healthy, and, without relapsing with her kidney disease. But she was in a marriage that wasn't good. So my sister, she ended up getting a divorce. Her overcoming, she's the only person in my entire family to have a master's degree. And I couldn't be more proud of her. She chose education as a way to build stability for herself and her kids. After her divorce, her pattern that she broke was that she became hyper independent and not codependent on other people, men, to validate her, for example. She became very protective in relationships, prioritizing her kids and stability above all else. She has said, I don't need to invite anyone into my life with my children. I'm happy the way I am. If I meet someone and they want to come into my world, I'm going to vet them out so thoroughly before they're even anywhere near my kids. And I totally respect her for that because I'm going through that right now with my partner. We have done the same with his kids. Intentional choices created that long term stability for her. Now, my younger brother, he's the first one in my family to get a college degree, and he's 7 years younger than me. He broke the family pattern by finishing college. There was no one else in our family, aunts, uncles, yes, but my parents and our siblings, no one had finished college, including myself. He built a career and financial independence, and he sacrificed a lot to make it happen. The moment I realized that he was making different choices, honestly, this guy at 19 years old, after school, took 1 year off, one gap year. He sold Kirby vacuum cleaners door to door. This guy was a monster salesperson, crazy salesperson. He ended up getting into banking after he got his college degree in physical education. His degree landed him a job at one of the largest auto financing companies in the United States. And he is now an AVP there. So I'm incredibly proud of my brother. Funny story though is my career started as a teller in 2004 with no degree. Funny thing is, when I was 21 years old working at this bank in Oklahoma, part of my job as a teller was to cross sell other solutions or opportunities. And so I asked one of our customers very hesitantly, because I didn't know what I was talking about, if he'd be interested in a CD today after I made his deposit. And he said, well, I don't know. Can you tell me more about that? And I did not know what the hell a CD was, really. I knew it was a certificate of deposit, but I didn't know how it all worked. So I got put on the spot, and I can promise you, after that moment, I learned about a CD and I learned my job, because if you have to cross sell, if you have to sell a solution, you better understand it. You better know how it works, and you better know the benefits. That's just a little funny story about little baby me. And now I work for an AI company that does technology for banks and credit unions, and no college degree, got an interview through my little baby brother and through a connection that he had, and now earn over six figures, which is obviously a huge support to my children. And that's the stability, that's the pattern that I broke. I said, I'm not going to let the fact that I don't have a college degree hold me back. My circumstances were different than everybody else's circumstances, but I was like, I choose a different life for myself. When my kids were younger, it was survival mode. Now it is intentional, deliberate, repeated choices creating opportunities that I'm taking advantage of. And those opportunities have created a better life for us. Now, let's talk about path two, repeating the pattern. And this one is painful, okay? I'm not pointing fingers, but I have siblings who faced chronic instability, financial struggles, job changes, evictions, getting fired, quitting because they're angry, teen pregnancy that was repeated in the family. My mom got pregnant at 16. My stepsister became pregnant at 15. She had her baby, and then that baby got pregnant with a baby at 15. And that's an example of these repeating patterns. My stepsister, who was 15 when she had a baby, did not really raise her child or her other kids. She had two more kids. She leaned on my parents to take care of her kids and to fill the gaps, which wasn't fair for my parents. It wasn't fair for her children either. And so now her kids are grown and they have kids. And her daughter, who had a baby at 15, also doesn't raise her children. So we have these patterns that are repeating themselves over and over again. Patterns persist until somebody interrupts them. So we have the decision to interrupt that pattern and make it change. I want to make sure that I'm very clear about that. Your circumstances don't define who you are forever. Now I want to talk about codependency because that is my hang up, okay? Needing validation from others, a fear of being alone. This became obvious for me in my relationships that I stayed in for far too long and was treated like garbage, but I just had a fear of being alone and I was codependent on those people. I realized at a certain point in my life that I was burnout, I was hurting, and God was nudging me towards self awareness. I noticed that I was repeating childhood patterns after my second separation. I leaned on my faith. It required me to own my shit and sit in it for a minute. I went to multiple therapists and I just hadn't found my one. And I could have stopped. I could have completely given up on therapy. But I ended up finding the right therapist and sat with him and talked with him for multiple sessions as I started to realize who I am and what I deserve. And what I deserve is not what I was giving myself as a human being. Healing doesn't look the same, but avoiding healing always looks familiar. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about my career. At 20 years old, I married my first husband at a courthouse. Life was chaotic before that. I had gotten a DUI, I had lost my job, I had tried to commit suicide, and I had clung to this man to try to fix me. So we ended up getting married, and I was really struggling to find a job that was going to be stable. I just needed stability. And I was working as a pharmacy technician at the local grocery store pharmacy. And I wasn't making hardly any money, and I was working full-time hours. And the bank manager that worked across the street came in and she didn't even know me. And she said, I'd like to offer you a job. I'd like for you to apply for an interview as a bank teller. I was like, really? She said, yeah, you know how to count a drawer, right? And I was like, yeah, I do. And she was like, okay, well, I'm hiring and I just have seen you working around here and I've seen your attitude and I'm interested in talking to you further. So I interviewed for the job, got the job, making $7.93 per hour. Mind you, that was a huge pay bump for me. That equates to 15 grand a year. I didn't have a degree. I had no blueprint. I was what I call a baby teller. I was so nervous. I was so scared, but it was a choice. Stability over chaos. I was going to make my life better. I shared the story already about the mishap with the customer calling me on not knowing the products. And I learned, right? I worked for that bank for 3 years before we moved to Georgia. But I learned in those 3 years very quickly. I picked things up. I became the vault teller. I became the teller supervisor. I became a personal banker. And then as a personal banker, I won awards. And I was able to travel to Oklahoma City. And I remember eating ramen in the hotel that I had brought with hot coffee water because I didn't have any money to buy myself meals while I was at this conference to be reimbursed by the company. But that's where I come from. I just figured things out. I was not going to ask anybody for money. I wasn't going to borrow money. I was just going to do it. So I went to the conference. I accepted my award. I still have that award to this day. And I'm proud of myself. Over the next 10 years, I gained the skills and the confidence and the resilience to continue this, path of learning and banking career. I obviously eventually, spoiler alert, divorced my first husband and I got remarried, started my blog, Perfection Hangover, and started exploring technology. It was scary at first because I didn't know anything about it, but I knew that I was meant for more than what I was currently doing. And I knew that I had a voice and I had a story to tell and I wanted to help people. So I started Perfection Hangover. It was all over the place. But The tech skills that I learned just from creating blogs and copy and writing and images and graphics, graphic design, all of those things set me up for the moment where my brother connected me to that former CXO at a credit union who was hiring for my job. And although I didn't have the degree, I didn't have the paper to back it, I knew that I had experience and skills that were valuable enough to get me the job. Fast forward, I've been with that company for nearly 4 years. I've recently been promoted, and it wasn't easy every time either. I'll talk more about that later, but it wasn't luck, it wasn't privilege, and it wasn't perfection. Every advancement, opportunity, everything was built decision by decision. My circumstances didn't change at first, but my choices did. So now, looking back at my other siblings who were also following a positive path, was encouragement that, hey, some of us actually want to do better. And so, again, this is not a dig, but it's saying if you come from a family that is large, that is, you all come from the same place and you're wondering, oh my gosh, why did that one make it and that one didn't? It's as simple as the choices that we made altered our lives. So here's what I want you to take away from today. Your childhood, your family history don't define you. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be ready. You don't even have to be perfect, obviously. The only thing you have to do is make one choice that's different from what's familiar. That's how the change begins. All of us in my family started out in the exact same place, but we ended up in very different places. And the reason isn't luck or privilege, it's the choices we made one by one over time. And that's the power that you have too. Maybe that means setting a boundary you've been avoiding. Maybe it's taking a small step toward a goal that feels scary. Or maybe it's just noticing a pattern and deciding not to repeat it. Whatever it is, just start. One choice at a time is all it takes to break a cycle. If this episode stirred something in you, sit with it, reflect. Maybe journal one choice you can make today. Doesn't have to be huge. Awareness is usually the first crack in a cycle, and that's where everything begins. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next episode.